Okay, our session is being recorded. Anyway, welcome again. I know it's a holiday. People have been out doing things. As a retired Air Force person myself, I know how special Memorial Day can be. But I didn't want to get too far behind, and I'm going to be gone to a conference for the next day or so. So I thought best to get the material out there. And as always, I'm recording it, so if you aren't able to make the live presentation, the recording will suffice. I like to have people hear it live, as I mentioned last time, because that keeps me honest if I say something really, really silly or confusing, so people can ask right away. Now, last week, we started by talking about the decision biases, traps, and everything. I hope if you read the text and your assigned readings, and even the one that's barriers to evidence-based decision making. If you read all that, you see how prevalent. First of all, the Baseman book points out, and it's the Bible, so to speak, on this. It points out all the various flaws. I tried to synopsize a little bit of that last week. So we all have these biases. Evidence-based decision making can help. Emphasis on help overcome some of them, if used properly. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about this week. What's the evidence show for that? And then, of course, we're going to get into doing some of this. We're going to frame a decision. We're going to build some models, cursory ones in this course, detailed ones a little bit later downstream in Data 640. But you're going to see that there is a way to overcome some of these biases. And you're going to be fighting against some of the culture of some of your organizations. Some of you have already posted some interesting insights into the cultural aspects. You know, if you don't have top management support and top management backing for any kind of analytics, it's going to be a tough sell. No two ways around it. Because as I mentioned last week, we're looking for absolute answers. If a data scientist comes in and says, I can solve your problem, I can tell you exactly who's going to commit fraud, who's going to churn or leave the company, who's going to buy what products, they're misleading you. What they can do, hopefully, is do a better job of indicating who's going to buy a product, who's likely to churn or leave the company, who's likely to commit fraud, who's likely to do whatever. Well, in the case of students, who's likely to struggle in class. With predictive analytics, they can do a better job, that relative aspect that I mentioned. So with that as sort of our background, this really continues the discussion a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about analytics and what does the evidence show in terms of supporting analytics. And then I want to say a few words about decisions first. All of you should now have your accounts, and you should be beginning at least to actively get into those accounts. And don't try to solve the assignment for week 4 yet. Try to learn the software. It may look like there's not much to it at first, but there is. You can drill down. There's a lot of depth, a lot more things, and James Taylor has done a masterful job because, as I said, if you've got something better to frame a decision, please be sure to show it to me because I'll switch. I haven't found anything, and I've been teaching this aspect of decision-making for over 20 years. So we'll talk about that. So here we go. The analytics big bang. I'm a sucker for charts. I'll mention that right up front. There's 2 things that I'm very partial to. Great graphics, because they give insight. And secondly, survey information, especially from the more renowned surveys, these credible ones that tell me what's going on in the real world. You all are in the real world. You have the luxury, so to speak, of knowing what's going on in the real world, at least to a degree within your organization. I, as a professor, doing some consulting, but not a whole lot, have to rely on things like surveys, articles, readings, white papers, etc., to try to keep up with what's really happening. I know what the textbooks say. I want to know what Deloitte, Accenture, McKinsey, and others have to say by doing these surveys, and we'll talk about that tonight. So here's a gee whiz chart. I really like this from FICO, so you can go get it yourself. We're sort of over here. We're kind of in the where analytics is starting to become a household word. No one's really questioning that it's important. What people are questioning is, how do I do it? How hard is it? What's it going to cost me? What kind of resources does it take? What can I get for an answer? So we're seeing a nice growth here. Remember, many of these techniques have been around for a long time. What is different now, and it makes a big impact on me, perhaps not you, But what is different now is things are doable. You need bandwidth. You need processing power. You need data. You need clouds. You need a lot of things to do the kinds of things we're talking about with neural nets, with regression, with decision trees. Those were all techniques that I was able to do very minimally when I was in graduate school. I loved them, but you couldn't really do them. You could show them to people. You could do demos, but you couldn't really do much with it. And look what's coming next. Who knows when next is, but we're starting to see some instances of this already. Ubiquitous analytics, cloud-based, individuals using analytics in everyday decisions, curing rare diseases, predictive policing, anticipatory analytics, especially with the Internet of Things, mass marketing, and so forth. So, your organization is somewhere in this spectrum. Hopefully you're at least over here investigating, analyzing, thinking about it. Some of you posted some interesting insights there. Many of you posted some of your decision-making scores, if you will, from that little tool we talked about. So that's very interesting, and I appreciate that. Gives me some insights about where we are and what's going on. Okay, now this is from James Taylor. As you know by now, I'm a big fan of Mr. Taylor, the creator, owner, and proprietor of Decisions for Software. He does these reports periodically. He keeps updated. He looks at software. He analyzes it. He tells you the good, the bad, and the ugly about the packages he looks at. So it's a great resource. It's how I've found many of the software packages I use in this course, including his own, of course, but things like Prediction, Big ML, Palisade, etc. So he just published, not too many months ago, his update on the analytics capability landscape. Analytics capability landscape. It's really quite good. He does a great job with these white papers, and so I pulled a few charts out of that. Here's where we are today. What are people using analytics for today? Well, as you can see, the lion's share is reporting and monitoring. A small amount are using it for deciding. But where are we headed within the next 12 to 24 months? Look at the growth, according to Mr. Taylor's predictions and according to his survey. This is a survey-based white paper or report, if you will. We're going to see a tremendous increase in the use of analytics for decision-making. And I think that's great. I think that's where it belongs. Again, we want to overcome some of those decision biases. We want to mitigate the decision flaws we all have. So if you go to an evidence-based approach, and you can see from 27 to 70, almost 70% in less than 2 years, is a pretty big jump. Again, decision-making is what matters most when picking analytics capabilities. Think about that. When you're hiring someone to be an analytics person, when you're picking a piece of software, when you're outlining a project, what should you focus on? Decision-making. That's what matters most when picking capabilities, okay? So a decision-centric approach is becoming the main idea behind analytics. This was another chart I picked out from his report. Again, I would encourage you to read the whole thing. Decision-led begins with a decision, plus role-centric, identify the roles involved. Again, you will see big parts of this in the Decisions First software approach, which is using decision modeling notation. Mr. Taylor is head of the whole consortium behind that, so, big deal. So knowing the decision you're trying to improve and characterizing 4 critical characteristics: volume, how often must we make this decision? Repeatability, how different is making this decision each time? Latency, how long do we have to make it? And complexity, how many factors must be considered? Those are 4 good questions. And then, once you know the decision, determine who's on point to help. Is it the business decision maker, the analyst, the IT professional, the analytic professional, or all of the above? And then, style-based, identify the right style of analytics, explorer or settler. So read this report, and you will see a lot more detail about this. Okay? From another report, Phillips, the Analytics Advantage for Just Getting Started. This is from Deloitte, and I'm a huge fan of Deloitte. I'm sorry, I see a message from someone saying, where do I go to download this PowerPoint? Oh, okay. Yeah, I post all of these in the Leo section under each course lesson. I will admit that I'm usually tinkering with them up until almost the day of presentation. So they get posted kind of late, but they're there as PDF files. Key findings, analytics has arrived. Well, that's good. Deloitte, again, they're one of the leaders in keeping up with this stuff. The best is yet to come. 96% say this will become more important in the next 3 years. Better decision making. Aha, that's one of the reasons we're going to this. Marketing and customers. Only 1% say the greatest benefit of using analytics is identifying new product and service revenue streams. Isn't that interesting? Structure is a challenge. Yes. Many organizations stovepipe analytics. Put a group of analytics people together and say, you figure it out. Well, we need to have a broader approach. We need to have the functional areas represented. So we need to see more of a sharing. We talked about that a little bit last week. Key barriers to overcome. Okay, several key barriers, which data management and access to talent are the most problematic. Well, you all are going to solve the access to talent, aren't you? You're going to get this nice degree. You're going to go out there and help take care of that thing. So that's good. So another good chart. Okay, now we know there are many types of analytics. There are descriptive analytics, which you've done some of with Tableau. Okay, and that's very valuable. It's good to get insights. It's good to see what is going on. Okay, and predictive analytics is where you'll be when you get, especially a little bit in this course. We'll do some predictive analytics in weeks 4 through 8. And then you'll do all in-depth predictive analytics when you get to Data610, which is called predictive modeling. And so you'll go beyond the what is happening and get into what's next. Predicting things based on associations among data and predict the likelihood. And then prescriptive analytics, well, that's a little bit further out. But prescriptive analytics is getting into doing the optimization, experimental design and optimization to try to make things even better. We'll say a little bit about that in this course. I cover a lot more of that, again, in Data610, so a little bit. And this is right out of your text, Keeping Up with the Quants. Or actually, this is out of the article that complemented the text. This is an article by Mr. Davenport and Kim from the Harvard Business Review. So another nice chart, this one from SAS. Again, puts it on a little spectrum. And what I like about this, of course, is the degree of intelligence is on one axis and the competitive advantage is on the other. Okay? And you can see down here, we're talking about what happened. And up here, we're trying to say what's going to happen. And up here, what's the best that can happen. We will cover one sort of optimization technique a little bit in this course. When I do the demo in week, I think, 7 of Palisade evolutionary algorithms, genetic algorithms, you'll see that is an optimization technique designed to say, here's the best thing you should do. So, we're on the spectrum. Your companies are various places. Hopefully, you're not too far down to the bottom left. You're not just doing standard reports or ad hoc reports. You're doing things like at least dashboards and giving people some insights. Okay, yet again, Harvard Business Review Analytics Services Report. How does the use of analytics improve decision making? That's a good question, isn't it? We talked about the biases in decision making. All right. So exactly how does analytics help overcome some of those biases? Well, I'm not sure I agree with the first one, compressed time frame. If you want to build a real good analytics approach to a lot of problems, they're not quick, certainly not quicker than intuition or hunch or just gut feel. Those are things you can do sitting at your desk in a matter of a fraction of a second. I know what to do here. Yeah, right? So I don't think I agree with the compressed time frame. I do agree that compressed time frames forcing decisions to be made more quickly is happening. We all are having to make decisions much more quickly. You can't wait. The competition is moving. It's worldwide. Things are happening. You can't afford to sit around in angst over these things. You've got to make some decisions, but you want to make good ones. Okay, so these are some of the problems. So compressed time frames forcing you to do something faster. Decisions lack transparency. Well, again, gut feel, intuition, hunch has no transparency. You say, I just think that's the way it ought to be. Whereas with analytics or any model, you've got a model there. You can look and see what's included, what was left out, what should have been included if it didn't work out well. Were those exogenous factors that I didn't control? Were those things that I could have anticipated? Again, you will see that Decisions First is designed to help you frame a decision so you know exactly what you should include. Who should be getting you that information? When should they get it to you? How should they get it to you? What kind of analytics support the information? Data drives decisions. People are starting to realize we've got data on everything. More than we can deal with, as a matter of fact. Skills are being enhanced. Use of analytics enhances skills. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more about this because when you think skills, you think what? Well, you probably think quantitative skills, numerical skills, logical thinking skills. What about innovation? What about collaboration? Those aren't skills you normally think that analytics would drive, but you'll see in a moment some interesting results. And finally, why the use of analytics pay off? We are starting to see some ROI numbers, some return on investment numbers that say, aha, we actually do get bang for the buck. Hopefully you read that article about the $13.01 for every dollar spent on analytics. It seems pretty impressive to me, a 13-to-1 payoff, and many of them are more than that. Okay, so now on to one of my favorite all-time surveys. And again, this is from a very reputable outfit, Sloan, MIT. Do really good work. This thing, I should mention that there's a follow-up, actually, to this survey by the same folks, Chiron, Prentice, and Ferguson. And I watched if anybody wants the link, I'll post it. In fact, I probably will post it anyway. They just did a follow-up webinar because they do webinars once they publish documents. They do webinars to explain in greater depth, and the webinars are well worth watching. And they just did one called the Analytical Talent Dividend, and it was a follow-up to this. So we will see some answers here, and we'll see some additional questions posed as we go through some of these slides. And the Analytics Talent Dividend by the same authors went the next step and said, okay, how are we going to quantify or rectify what we see as the problems? Anyway, let's stop first and go look at this survey. 2,000 managers published in the winter of 2014, so 4 or 5 months ago, okay? And you can get this link out of Sloan Management Review from your library. You can probably find it online if you just go and poach that into. First thing we found, or they found, not we, they found is a need to increase analytics use. Most respondents see the need to improve decision-making through analytics. 87% agree strongly or somewhat with that finding. That's pretty neat, right? That's a limiting number. You hardly ever get 87% of people to agree on anything. People need to step it up. What about next? Now, I mentioned you'll see some things that maybe you didn't think would occur, and I think this is the first one. Half of the survey respondents agree that analytics is helping their organization innovate. So, we're not just using analytics as a cost-cutting tool. We're not just using analytics to identify likely fraudulent transactions or people who are going to leave the organization. We're using it to cause and foster innovation. And again, almost half, okay? Or actually, when you add up and somewhat agree and strongly agree, you do get half. Innovation, okay? Interesting, I thought. How about collaboration? Respondents who say that analytics has helped improve their ability to innovate are more likely to collaborate with others using analytics. Collaborate with others using analytics. So I found that to be very interesting too. If it's helping you innovate, you're likely to collaborate. They go hand in hand. So this is very important too. So not many people think that analytics fosters collaboration. Again, there's still a lot of people who think the analytics people are in a room by themselves doing their quantitative thing, and it's a mystery. But no, the more likely thing is that the functional areas will begin to collaborate with the data scientists and the business analysts if you want to make this truly effective. And by truly effective, I mean changing the corporate culture, which you'll see comes up in a minute. So, analytics and organizational change. Respondents strongly agree that analytics is helping the organization innovate are more likely to say it's changed the way the company conducts business. Oh, thank goodness. Because if people were using analytics and coming away discouraged or saying that doesn't work or it's not helpful, it would be a bad sign, wouldn't it? Instead, we see, especially those who think it helps innovation, very much agreeing that it has changed the culture. Very much agreeing it's changed the culture. And look at the difference. Those who are using it successfully, we've got about an 85% saying it's really helping change the culture. Those we only have about 42%. Big difference. Big difference. And again, this is a very interesting survey. Now, they went further and said, okay, by the way, the whole report, well worth reading again. The next thing they went and did and said let's come up with some categories. And by the way, this got updated in that analytics talent dividend report. I'll say more about that some other week. They have analytics challenged, we have analytical practitioners, and we have innovators. The bulk of the people are in this practitioner color right now, the screen color. What are they doing? They're working to become more data-driven. Good. They're the primary operation in their application of analytics, have just good enough data, not perfect, and have more of the information they need to make decisions. Don't have all of it, but have more of the information. So this is the sweet spot at the moment. If you're over here, where you're still relying on management experience, gut feel, again, I think that's, as do most studies, say it's kind of dangerous because the competitors are moving out based on evidence, and you're basing it on gut feel. Now, you better have a leader, a decision maker who, first of all, his guts are really good about making decisions, and secondly, who has credibility with people who have to carry out those decisions. Because if they're wondering, how did the boss make that decision? And somebody says, well, it was just his or her hunch. Not a lot of confidence in that, where somebody can show you the model, show you the data. Focus on cost reduction. Again, this is a big difference in it. Cost reduction versus innovation. The laggards, the challenged, if you will, are still focused on reducing costs. I used to use a very great article talking about the difference between people who see information technology as a cost sink. In other words, let's minimize it. They treat it as a utility. Let's minimize it, just like we minimize the amount of water we use, the amount of electrical power we use. We get it as cheaply as we can. We get the least amount we need. Others view information technology as a way to better or beat competition. And they're doing things, everything from analytics to decision science to artificial intelligence to innovative things. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference in how companies and organizations view information technology in general. There's an equally big difference in how they view analytics in general. So I view it, of course, very positively, as I imagine you do, being in this program. Not everyone sees it that way. And, of course, lack appropriate data management, and analytical skills. If you don't have anyone who can do analytics, there's not much you can do. Now, what about this small number of innovators? Well, they have an analytics culture driven by senior mandates, so the top-level people have bought in. They're more strategic in their application of analytics. They're not looking at just cost cutting. They're looking at how can we leverage new opportunities? How can we get ahead of the power curve? They place a high value on data, and they have higher levels of data management analytical skills. Makes sense, doesn't it? So what, of course, we'd like to see is much more movement into this area, the 12%. Now, one of the more interesting charts to come out of the study, the survey, if you will, one of the more interesting conclusions that the authors came to, based on this chart here, is that they found that culture is the major driver in whether or not you achieve a competitive advantage with analytics. Not data management, not skills. Yes, those are important, and you like to see those ramp up, but look what becomes the number one driver in whether you are able to leverage your analytical capabilities for competitive advantage. It is culture. If you can get the top level or the culture throughout the organization to say, we need to base our decisions on evidence, You will overcome many of the biases. You will improve your competitive advantage. You will start to see people's analytics capabilities advance as they use it. Then they broke this down. What does an analytics culture consist of? Because that's always a question I have. Culture. We all understand sort of culture, but we really would like to know, are there pieces to that? And the answer, according to these people who wrote this, did this survey and wrote the report, is yes. There are pieces: behaviors, values, outcomes, and norms. Okay? Those are the 4 pieces. Then they went and said, here's what these mean. Behaviors. We're able to integrate information management and business analytics into a strategy. We promote analytics best practices. We collaboratively use data. We plan investments in our technology, new talent, new training. Because again, when you leave this program with a master's in data analytics, do not think that you know everything there is to know. There will be new things come along. There are new things come along virtually every day in the world of analytics. And certainly new tools, new techniques, new approaches, new cases, new opportunities will come along. And then pressure from senior managers to become more data-driven and analytical. That's what they mean by behaviors. Sorry, I didn't mean to click there. What do they mean by values? Data is treated as a core asset. Just like anything on the asset side of the ledger, it's an asset. Analytics is a top-down mandate driven by executives. Values. So they value analytics. They value the people who can do analytics. They value the people who can explain analytics. What about decision-making norms? Well, again, analytical insights guide strategy, and data analysis outweighs management experience. We're letting analytics outweigh gut feel, hunch, intuition. Organizational openness to new ideas. That's what we mean by decision-making norms. And finally, outcomes. Analytics changes the way business is done. There are organizations where you need to show the business case, the analytics support for that, for virtually every decision. There aren't many yet, but starting to see that occur. Places like Xerox, Procter & Gamble, elsewhere. I'm sure Amazon and many of the others too. Maybe even your organization. You're starting to see analytics become one of the drivers to evidence-based decision making. So they said these are the 4 pieces you need to look at if you're going to change the analytics culture. And it would be nice if we had time to go back and sort of check these off in your organization on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Where are you? How much of this are you doing? Okay. Here are some key questions they said you should ask. Is my organization open to new ideas? Remember, we had 3 categories of folks. We had the analytically challenged. We had the practitioners. We had that small segment, that 12% that were the innovators. We had the 54% that were the practitioners. And we had the other 34% or so that were challenged. So these are the kinds of questions you should ask if you're trying to figure out where you are sort of on the spectrum. Are you open to new ideas? Look what the difference is. The innovators, almost 70% are open to new ideas, where that strongly agree being open to new ideas, whereas with the challenge, 14%. See, this is what makes a big difference, isn't it? You have to be open to new ideas because you're going to change the way business is done. The next question, does your organization treat assets as a core asset? Again, enormous difference between the innovators and the challenge, and a substantial difference between the practitioners. I mean, if you add these 2 together, that's 50%, and these 2 add up to 17%. So a big, big difference in perspective. The next question, does your senior management push for analytics? Again, you're seeing the same kind of delta in each of these questions. And that's part and parcel of what you have to help overcome with success stories. You're not going to overcome it just by jawboning or beating on a desk. You're going to have to show some capabilities. You're going to have to prove it. And I think that's appropriate. And finally, are you using analytics to guide strategy? Look at this number. That's huge. That's huge. 91% versus 29%. Okay. And is it changing how we do business? Again, 85 versus 11. And even in the middle here, we're up to 51 versus 11. So big differences here. Now here's my take on all this. Back to the key question. How exactly does the use of analytics improve decision making? Well, first of all, I think framing is important. Davenport thinks it's important in his book. I believe Tom Davenport. I've seen it in my consulting. I've seen it in other textbooks. I've seen it everywhere. If you don't frame the right question, you don't frame the right decision, you're doomed. Now, if you do frame the right decision, the right question, you still might fail because you might not execute that framing right. It's not unlike project management. When I teach project management, I emphasize huge emphasis on creating the project management plan, but an equally huge emphasis on executing that plan. If you don't have a plan, you're not going anywhere. If you do have a good plan, you still might fail in execution. It's a similar metaphor here. If you don't have a frame, a good frame, you're going to fail. If you do have a good frame, you might fail, but this time it would be because you didn't execute that frame well, or you didn't build that frame very well. But at least you got a shot. Second, if you build a framework and build a model and have all the results laying out on the table or on the PowerPoint or on the chart or on the white paper or on the report that you submit, you have just created transparency. Someone can say, how did you do this? And you say, look, here's what I considered. Here are the things I didn't consider. Here are the relative importances of the things I considered. Here's where I got the information. Here's the analytical model I built to help me get meat on the bones in terms of what it looks like will happen. Where did I go wrong? What do you not see? It's transparent. It still could turn out wrong, but that transparency helps, doesn't it, when you want to improve that process in the future. Third one is a pretty obvious one. We can handle a lot more data with analytics than we can in our head. I think we looked at many of the cognitive limitations last week. I wish I'd had time to go through all of the little exercises and drills because it would have proven to all of you that you have weaknesses and biases. We all do, especially in terms of handling data. We can't handle very much. Speeds up decisions. I've already said I'm not so sure that one is a valid reason for analytics. I think the fastest way to make decisions would not be to use analytics, but to use gut feel and intuition. Fosters innovation. I think the evidence is starting to show that. Enables the use of much more complex models. You know, it's easy to use a simple model if you say, well, if we do 2 of these and 2 of these, we're going to get 4 of those. But if someone says you need to use a more complex model, be it a decision tree, a regression model, a neural network, support vector machine, whatever, you are not going to be able to do that in your head. So analytics can help you with that. Now, the difficulty becomes, there's a sidebar to that one. The difficulty becomes, can you explain and articulate what you did? And the answer is, I think you can. I think you can. Does the complex calculations. Again, this probably means a lot more to me than it does to you. But I will tell you a true factoid, if you will. When I was in my doctoral program, admittedly a long time ago, I graduated my doctorate in 1979. I had a course in regression analysis, entire semester course. And without exaggerating, I can tell you that a small regression problem, nowhere near the kind you could do in this course, took me almost 7 hours to do because I had to do it by hand on a Frieden adding machine. My wife bought me a calculator in December of about 1978 or so, and it had it could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. It had 2 memory storage devices, cost $150 from Sears. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever because now I could do that same regression problem in about 3.5 hours. Now, of course, that same regression problem would take 1 click of a button in any of the software packages out there. So we're able to do the complex calculations. Now that, again, puts a premium on what? Well, not only being able to explain the models, but why not create multiple models and compare them? You know, in the days when I was in school, we did 1 model because we were exhausted. Wow. Somebody said, well, what if I change this? What if I change that? What if this isn't right? What if I use a different technique? And said, I haven't got time for that. And, you know, those of us who were quantitatively inclined appreciated the techniques very much. I thought they were amazing. Neural nets, regression, decision trees, management science tools. queuing theory, all those. I thought they were great, but I thought, how do you ever do these in the real world? And the answer is, unless you were a large organization with a mainframe, you didn't. Now, the answer is, why aren't you doing them? So we can do a lot more complexity. It standardizes the approach. Again, we want to get this culture driven to the point where when somebody says, I think we ought to go left, you say, well, show me the logic behind your decision. And I can tell you that's a different approach than somebody who says, well, I'm the boss. That's where we're going. Provides an audit trail. Not all decisions turn out well, even if you frame them well, even if you execute them well. There are, as I said earlier, exogenous factors. Some kind of a meteor could strike, an earthquake could strike, peace could break out in the Mideast. Who knows? You don't have everything in your model, but what you'd like to be able to do is do an audit and say, did this succeed because we did a good job of framing and executing, or did it succeed because we were lucky? Did it fail because we did a poor job of framing and executing, or did it fail because we were victims of very unusual circumstances that could not have been anticipated? There is a difference. There is a difference. 1982, I think, Redskins versus Oakland in the Super Bowl. Redskins were 14-point favorites, and I happened to have grown up a Redskin fan. I had a friend who actually wanted to bet on the game, and I said, well, I guess I'll give you the points. He said, no, I'll bet you even. And I said, well, that's a crazy bet. I got to take that. Redskins are 14-point favorites. As those of you who are football aficionados know, the Redskins got clobbered, and so I lost the bet. So a lot of people say, well, you made a bad decision to bet on the Redskins in that game. I would maintain that I made a good decision and had a bad outcome. What do I mean by that? If you were to give me that same decision again, one team is 14-point favorites over another team and ask me to bet even on that game, and I get to take the team that's the favorite, I'll do it every time. A similar thing happened in the book Decision Traps. They had a coin that was not fair. The coin was weighted 65% heads, 35% tails. And they asked people before they tossed it, what do you want to bet on? Well, people said, I'm betting on heads, 65-35. That's easy. And they tossed it, and it came up tails. And people said, oh, I lost. And they said, yeah, you lost. Did you make a bad decision? And they said, yes. Well, I'm going to toss it again, so I guess you want tails this time. Oh, no, I want heads. Well, if you made a bad decision, why would you take the same option? See, you wouldn't. You made a good decision. It had a bad outcome. That can happen in the world of analytics. And that puts you in quite a bind because not too many cultures will tolerate any kind of a failure. So you want to be careful with your decisions. But still, if you have an audit trail, you can go back and say, why did this not turn out the way I hoped, expected, or planned? And again, if it's because of some fluke factor, an exogenous factor, you did fine. If it's because you did a poor job of framing or executing the decision, you need to have some improvements, right? And then finally, it changes the business model, as we've discussed. You begin to get into a different approach. So this is my take on why analytics is important in terms of improving decision making. Now, a little GWIS chart. I'm not going to leave it up for long because I think most of you can probably figure this out for yourself. But I thought it was really neat to see that, break it down into some of the kinds of decisions you can make with analytics. Because some people say, well, I know you can predict fraud. I know you can sort of predict who's going to leave the organization. But look at all these other things. Pretty neat. How likely is a person to default on a loan? How do I stay within a client's organization? Blah, 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 blah. Goes on and on and on. It's from a nice little book you can download called Predictive Analytics for Dummies. I like the Dummies books. They have a nice way of explaining many things. I thought it was a neat chart. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the limitations because I've painted a pretty rosy picture, I think, and sometimes I need to be reined in a little bit. And so I try to rein myself in by saying, well, if it were this easy, if it were this impressive, why would we all just jump on the bandwagon? Well, this is another good survey from Lava Storm where they looked at some of the limitations, okay? First of all, everybody sort of agrees that analytics is important, so what's holding you back? I mean, 83% said it's critical. Well, what's holding you back? Look at these numbers. Lack of skills, training, and education, lack of funding or resources, inadequate support from executives, data is not integrated. Pretty obvious things. What may not be so obvious is under skills most urgently needed. Certainly the first one is obvious. Statistics, math, or other quantitative chops. You got to have a little bit of that. Analytics tool training. Again, I would maintain that the math involved is no longer a showstopper. It would be if you were still doing this by hand or even with a calculator. It would be tedious. It would be painful. It's not a showstopper. You hit enter, you're done. You'll see when we get into even a tool like prediction, and you've already used some tools, RapidMiner and others, you know, boom, done. The math is done. But now you need to be able to understand those tools, learn those tools, explain the answers, run the requisite sensitivities, etc. And then look at this third one that showed up. The third most urgently needed skill, critical thinking. Critical thinking. Again, I would maintain that that's partly where the framing comes in, because what you're doing there is critically thinking about the decision to be made. So critical thinking and questioning, skills most often mentioned as being necessary along with stat, math, and the quantitative skills. Pretty interesting stuff, in my opinion. Most common organizational structure is that the analytics people are functioning independently. And that's a problem, isn't it? That's a limitation because, as I said, we need a more ecumenical approach. We need cross-functional participation. And requirements gathering takes a significant amount of time. Listen to this. People spend just as much time gathering requirements as they do in the analysis. Just as much time. What can help with that? Framing. You'll see in decisions first, one of the things you have to do in there is fully list, explain all the things you're going to need to make the decision and how they interrelate. Again, once you start watching some of Mr. Taylor's ruminations on those things, you'll see how well this fits into our plan. And even though education is needed, ongoing education is not tied in. Well, we're starting to see some developments to overcome that. There are organizations beginning to form up. Informs that I belong to has ongoing continuing education. I would hope that even UMUC will offer workshops and so forth as new things come along that you can participate in. We also need tool improvements. Well, 23% said we got to have tools that are easier to use and more understandable. And of course, that's my mantra too. I believe you've got to be able to explain what you've done when you hit that button and built a neural network. When you hit that button and built a regression model, when you hit that button and built a decision tree and other models, what did you do and what does it mean? Again, sort of a summary. Critical thinking actually finished in the top when we were asked to put 3 things down that they thought were needed. Critical thinking finished first, stat and math second, analytics tool training fourth, business communication presentation skills fifth. So that's why we have a course like this. We're going to focus on some of those things. In this course, you'll get more depth in some of those things in other courses. So where do we start? Well, let's go back to one of our textbooks, the Davenport book, Keeping Up with the Quants, where he outlined very clearly 3 steps to a good solution. Frame the problem first. What is the problem? How serious is it? Where will we get the information? Who will be involved? What analytical model will we use? Will it be a spreadsheet? Will it be a dashboard? Will it be a predictive model? Will it be an optimization model? How will we measure results? What are the KPIs, knowledge performance indicators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then we build the model to solve it, actually support the frame. Okay? Then we explain the results, sell the results, get the decision operationalized. Too many models are built and then set on the shelf. You have to turn the answer into what do I do differently in the organization now that you've come up with this great model, this great decision? How do I do that? How do I operationalize what you've shown me? Okay, so that leads us to our first software product, doesn't it? Which focuses on the framing aspect. Now, Albert Einstein has made this nice quote that supports that, doesn't it? Said, if I had an hour to save the planet, I'd spend 59 minutes framing the problem, 1 minute solving. Okay, now Mr. Taylor has many, many resources that you can make use of to help learn the software. You should be spending your time wisely right now just learning the software. Then your group can sort of think about, we'll talk more about this in depth next week, what kind of a decision do you want to do for your first team assignment? First is to learn his philosophy and his approach and the software. Okay? He talks about the different kinds of decisions. There are strategic decisions which are probably not suitable as well to analytics as kind of the ones in the middle, and especially the operational ones. If you're going to build an analytics model that you want to use over and over again for decisions and make repeatable decisions to optimize or to improve on the way things are going, they need to be decisions that occur very frequently. Those are operational decisions. So this is where the sweet spot is. Now you say, oh, that's really, I want to have something for strategic. We've got other tools and techniques. They don't work as well. But for analytics, it's primarily operating in the operational and a little bit in the tactical. So we want decisions that are repeatable, non-trivial. They occur a lot. They're non-trivial, otherwise we wouldn't need a model. We can measure the impact, and we can automate them. Okay? Now, Mr. Taylor's technique in his approach is to build a decision requirements model, if you will, and there are 5 steps. Identify the decisions, describe the decisions, specify the requirements, complete the model, and then you generate this document. It says, okay, here's what we're going to do, guys and gals, and here's who's going to do it, and here's when they're going to do it by. Okay? You'll get into this as you go through his model. So you start with a decision to be made and decompose it. What is the decision to be made specifically? You can't just say build a better mousetrap. You got to say specifically to do what? What information do you need? What guidelines do you have that may limit you? Are there federal guidelines, local guidelines, company guidelines, policies? If the policy says we don't renew somebody after 2 years without good justification, we don't give them a discount on renewing their phone plan, then we can't do it, right? What expertise do we need? What regulations limit us? You know, there's everything from, you know, federal regulations to state to local regulations. Then we get into what kind of a model should we use. Is it a predictive model? Is it a data mining model? And so forth. And then are there sub-decisions that feed into that? So it's not something you do real quick and once. You'll get used to these different icons because they represent different things. Information icons, knowledge icons, different shape, and the rectangle, decision icons. And then you can drill down on those and get specifics. As you begin to flesh those out, notice we started with one decision. This is his standard walkthrough a problem scenario. We're trying to just select a marketing offer. Okay, we're concerned that someone might be leaving the company or leaving our product. Should we give them a discount? Well, before we can do that, we have to make a decision about these other things. Remember, they're rectangles, so they're decisions. We have to say, what's the offer value, and so forth and so on. And he walks you through this here, so I'm not going to bother doing it here because you need to watch the videos. Now look what it turned into. Select the marketing offer. Remember, everything in a rectangle is a decision. It's a sub-decision. This is the main decision. These are sub-decisions that have to be made before we can make the main decision. Before we can pick a marketing offer, we have to determine the value. Before we can pick a marketing offer, we have to see if the timing is right. Before we can pick a marketing offer, we have to determine what product are we talking about. Information has to come from the customer and the marketing officers. Knowledge has to come from our insights. Sometimes these are subjective things, and sometimes they're objective things. And then down here, buried in the bowels, is the analytics model. customer churn likelihood, which would be a predictive model, feeds into determining the customer loyalty, a decision, and that feeds in with determining the customer's value. Do we even want to give him or her an offer? Comes into this and so forth. Very interesting scenario that it walks you through. So we want to link this decision action to analytics. There always should be an analytics piece in the model. The end result is a complete framing and documenting of the decision to be analyzed. We have the introduction. We have the knowledge performance indicators. How will we know if we succeeded, by the way? Well, if we're only 10% accurate in retaining customers now, and our goal is to get to 20%, we'll know if we work, if the whole approach worked, only if we get to 20%. So we have to have knowledge performance indicators, KPIs. And then what analytics do we need to use? What decisions are impacted? And so on. So all these are pieces of the end result. Look at this thing. It's got all the pieces. When you get into this software and start drilling down, you'll see how these pieces fit in. Here's your audit trail of all the people who have participated in this project and what they've provided and when they provided it and when they looked at it and who you talked to. Very nice. It's a very good package, by the way. Now, before I found this software, which I've been using now for about 2 years, I used to give people a little handout from the book, again, my favorite book, Decision Traps. I've mentioned it before. And they have something in there called a frame analysis worksheet. Similar in concept, not the same, but it sort of outlines some things to think about to build the frame. What boundaries do you put on the question? In other words, what do we leave out? What yardsticks? Those will be your KPIs. What reference points to measure success? What metaphors? How do I think about this question? Why do I think about this question this way? How do others think about it? What does the frame emphasize? What does it minimize? And so forth. And then there's a filled out one about buying a car. Very simple decision. I can tell you from personal experience that this matters. When I went many years ago to buy a car, I took my family with me. New car, wife, and 3 children, young children at the time. And when we got to the car place, they all went in different directions. Some went and looked at, fancy convertible. I went and looked at a very staid, functional sedan. Some looked at cars that were more glamorous. Some looked at cars that were bigger. Some looked at cars that were more comfortable, had better maintenance. So you need to fill out the worksheet and exchange papers, so to speak, to see how everyone thinks about it. So this was what I used to use. I think something like Decisions First is a tremendous improvement on this because it adds great depth. But I just wanted to give you an example. So where do you start? Well, you start learning and using the software. There is no substitution for using it and trying it. You should have a login if you haven't been able to log in. Now, Faizi's name is on here, but Faizi has been co-opted for something else. So if you have a problem, send it to me. Or we've already had 1 or 2 problems solved by Mr. Taylor. You can send it to me. If I can't solve it, we'll send it jointly to Mr. Taylor. He's quite good at fixing things real quick if it relates to anything with his software. If it is working well for you, or if you've been able to log in at least, you might want to start by looking at some of these. This is a presentation that Mr. Taylor created just for our class. And there's the password, UMUC. This is the support portal. You see lots of documentation there. There really is no user's manual, but there's a lot of documentation that you can download. These are demos, walkthroughs, if you will, demos, videos. This is a webinar in which he walks you through a Decisions First model. And this is another good live demonstration. Now, do you need to look at all of these? No, but would it help? Sure. The more you can look at, the more you can absorb, the more you can try, the better off you'll be. And then what you want to do is go in and build one. Don't say, well, we'll build our first one and turn it in for assignment 4. No, I'd recommend you go in and try to build something small just to get used to the interface. All software has unique features that require sometimes you practice a little bit or you get good at them. So spend some time doing that. Don't try to rush too much to closure on getting the assignment done. You've still got the better part of 3 weeks before it's due at the end of week 4. We'll talk a little bit more about specifically what should you be thinking about putting in that assignment as your problem next week. So here are some of the articles, the tutorials, and so forth. And here we are. The assignment is due week 4. This is the start of week 2. You could allocate parts of the assignment in terms of what people look at if necessary. I mean, they're small teams. I would like everybody to look at everything. You probably want to have somebody on the team to be the coordinator, not the boss, the coordinator. You want to have ground rules. When are you going to meet? If you're thinking about things, working on things, discussing things, that should go in the work areas I've set up for each team in Leo. I can access those. Each team can access the areas for that team. No one can access other teams. So you're good there. It's going to be a full implementation of the decision-first approach with a problem. Well, we'll say more about that next week. There is an outline of what you're going to have to deliver, but again, it's too early to be seeking closure. I do like to see people creative and innovative in their approach. You're going to have to justify the pieces you need, and you're going to have to build a short PowerPoint presentation, not a narrated one this time, but a short PowerPoint presentation to explain what you did in assignment 4. What do I mean by that? Remember, one of the key things that we're trying to foster in this course is the ability to articulate what was the problem, what do you think needs to be done, what do you think we ought to do about it? You know, you're not going to have the answer, of course, you're just building the frame, but you should be able to articulate that frame in PowerPoint. Now, we used to, the first couple of times we taught this course, well, I taught this course, I had the students present that, but we have too many teams and it takes too long. You are going to have an opportunity to build a narrated PowerPoint for assignment 4, but for this assignment, just PowerPoint slides. But that puts a premium on being able to be concise and put the key pieces into the slides. And I'm not going to give you total guidance on that. People would love to have total guidance. Here's what goes on slide 1. Here's what goes on slide 2. That's not the way it works in graduate school. I'm trying to see if you can figure out some of the key pieces that need to go on there. If you were presenting this to your boss, what would you tell him or her what the plan is in this framing? Okay, so we'll say more about that again next week. Okay, what we're going to talk about next week. Next week, we're going to look at a couple of interesting things. You'll be, of course, learning decisions first, inside and out. But I will be talking about comparing and contrasting a couple of different analytical methodological approaches. We have the approach that keeping up with the quant specifies: frame, solve, communicate. Frame, solve, communicate. And we have the approach that the industry sort of has adopted called CRISP. Okay? And their approach is to go through these steps that you see across the top, the 6 steps, to complete a total analytical package. You will see there's some similarities, some overlaps, and common themes, because they too, if you look at this piece under business understanding, has a lot of framing aspects to it. Okay, and this course is be the model building, and then over here, the deployment is actually the selling of the answer. So we'll talk more about that. It's called the CRISP methodology. So you should ensure that you're not having any problem getting into the decisions first software. You're not having any problems viewing the videos, going through the documentation, practicing, that your team is up and ready to roll. And then you can sort of think about outlining at least who's going to do what week 4. But again, I would wait because I'll give you a little more guidance next week on that. Final slide, as always, is if you have a question that you feel you need to ask at this time that would benefit everyone, feel free. If it's a question during the week that you think the answer would benefit everyone, put it in that ask or let me have any questions discussion area. If it's a question that pertains just to your team or you personally, you can certainly email me or phone call if it's urgent. And that's kind of the way I like to end each presentation. There's plenty of opportunities for you. Now, again, I also know that there's also, because the assignment's not due for another close to 3 weeks, the end of week 4, It's easy to say, well, I'm busy right now. I'm going to get to this next week. You need to be practicing that software. You need to be reading and watching. Allocate some time. Make sure you're getting very conversant with the terminology, the approach, the things that go on in Decisions First. It's new. It's unique software. I'm sure none of you have used it before. It's not hard to learn, but it has some nuance to it. And so you want to be able to investigate that and look at many of the details. With that, I will stop and see if there are any questions that people want to ask tonight. Remember, I will be posting the recording to this presentation, so you're welcome to do it again or look at it. Okay, someone says, I'm not clear about the assignment. Well, again, you're not, where can we find our group? Well, you should be able to look and see the groups. Teams or groups are already made. That's been made for everybody. And then, of course, if you look under assignments, there's some detailed guidance as to what you're going to have to deliver. I'll say more about the specific topics that I would recommend you pick from when you start thinking about your model, because I'm not asking you to do a real world one. I'm asking you to take one of the more common, give you a peek ahead. I would suggest you take one of the more common kinds of analytical problems or problems that involve analytics, whether it's churning or fraud or something like that, and focus on that. But you should know what team you're on, okay? Your group, that's right there in Leo. Okay, I'm not going to give you, Dre, I'm not going to give you a list as well. I'm going to give you sort of a list. I guess you could call it that. It's not really a list, but I'll give you some suggested ones because, again, it's too early in learning. You're learning a new piece of software. I've been through many courses over 25 years of teaching. Almost all of them involve new software. And what you want to do, if your people are trying to learn the software, you want to focus on that. But we also want to make it as realistic as possible. So I've already mentioned a couple of things. You can say, well, we're going to deal with. Some groups actually try to use the same kind of problem that Mr. Taylor focused on. What kind of a marketing offer should we make? I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying that's a much, let's call it less creative approach. You could also look at. We're going to try to see what should we do about fraud? What should we do about people who are likely to be readmitted to the hospital? In other words, all that long list of decisions that were on that one chart I had earlier that I left up there just briefly from the Dummies book, those are all possible analytical decisions. And your group may not know a whole lot about what kinds of information would you need for that, which is why you'd have to go out and do a little bit of research and pull those pieces together. Question from Eric, should we seek approval if we select a topic that is not on the suggested list? If you think it's pretty far out, well, it wouldn't hurt to ask me for approval. I usually am very accommodating because, again, I want you to use the software and be creative. If you said, well, my decision is whether or not to wear a yellow shirt to work, well, probably not, but it has to have something that's going to have at least a component, an analytical component. Remember, you're not going to build the analytical model. You're just framing the problem, and you're saying, here is the piece, the analytical piece that will support that. It might be a dashboard. It might be a regression model. It might be some other kind of predictive model. It might be just a visualization model. So I'm not asking you to build the model. I'm asking you to frame the problem. There's a big difference. So yes, if you would feel more comfortable, certainly you can email me. Your group can send me a list or a topic. So we'll come back to that. Again, I want people learning the software and not closing in too much on the assignment yet. I know you'd like to do that, but I think it's important that we keep it open and learning the software first and looking at some of the kinds of problems. You might look at some case studies of analytical solutions from other organizations. Again, I'm not going to give you a specific set of websites to visit. There are many out there. And pick one of those and say, that's the kind of problem that could be really well framed. Or maybe it's something in your organization that you do want to look at. So we'll come back to that. I know that's a little nebulous. But, you know, in grad school, I like to leave things a little bit nebulous. It leaves room for innovation, creativity. It causes the group to have to think a little bit harder. I'm not going to give you you do have a step-by-step list of things you have to deliver in the guidance for the assignment, but I don't want to give you too much, handicap you too much and give you too much of a structured way you have to exactly go about the kind of problem you pick. So think about that. That's something to be doing now. You can be brainstorming your group. What kind of problems or decisions, I say problems and decisions, I mean the same thing. Opportunities, problems, decisions. What kind of things exist that with proper framing and some analytical support would be beneficial? So there's a good thing to think about this week while you're learning decisions. Good questions. And I'm not trying to dodge them because I don't want to give you too specific an answer at this time. Okay, other questions? Okay, well, I hope everyone had a good holiday and not too worn out. I know holidays can be stressful and can be fatiguing. So, again, find some time this week to make sure you're well-versed in decisions first. At the beginning of next week, week 3, you'll probably want to start structuring and closing in a little bit more on exactly what your group's going to do. And that still gives you plenty of time to actually do it, I think. Shouldn't be a problem. Okay, let me go ahead and stop sharing. Stop sharing. And I will then go ahead and stop the recorder.